And the kings of Naples, close to the palace, they developed their vineyards. They actually were buying grapes from their subjects, but then they ended up cultivating their own because, as I told you, they were always competing with their cousins in Paris, and they wanted to show off, and they wanted to demonstrate that, that they were doing a good job. They could not stand the fact that those guys were coming down south, with their own barrels. So they started developing their own vineyards, and they built actually 11 vineyards just close to the palace. And they planted a bunch of different varietals typical of southern Italy.
Fascinating people with stories to share, fabulous wines and the best local foods to accompany them, and beautiful places to discover and visit. All of this and more on Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on the Italian Wine Podcast. Join me for a new episode every Tuesday. Welcome to Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on Italian Wine Podcast. Today we travel to Campania for a special sub-series that focuses on this beautiful southern Italian region, its wines, gastronomy, and things to see and do. Campania has 5 provinces: Naples, Salerno, Caserta, Avellino, and Benevento, and we'll be dipping into all of them. We begin this morning in the province of Caserta with my guest Massimo Alois of Cantine Alois. Buongiorno, Massimo. We last met at Vinitaly in April. How are you today? And is it a beautiful day in Pontelatone?
Yeah, and actually it's pretty hot today. So, Mark, thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to talk to you guys. So our winery is in what we call Alta Campania, which actually includes 2 of the provinces you were mentioning, which are up north, on the border with Lazio. Lazio is the region where Rome is the capital. So one is Caserta and the other one is Benevento. We call it Alta Campania because, of course, it's above, Naples is above Avellino, and we have our winery there. Yeah.
Okay, so as you say, you're straddling the 2 provinces of Caserta and Benevento. Tell us a little bit about the province of Caserta. Historically, it's so important, not only for the history of Campania, but all of the south of Italy. And I know it's a very special place that's linked to your family history as well.
Exactly. So I would say just 2 things about history. Number one, it dates back to the Roman Republic, because Capua was one of the main cities, main towns during the Roman Republic and Empire as well. And just to mention, the amphitheater is the second biggest amphitheater, second just to the Colosseum in Rome. And I encourage everybody to go visit this Colosseum in Santa Maria Capua Vetere, that actually was the former Capua. And then number 2, I would mention the kings of Naples, the Spanish kings, which belong to the Bourbon family, linked and connected to the French, So these guys came down south in the 1734. And they set up their own residential area in Caserta. So Caserta was an ancient city built by the Lombards in the 9th century. The ancient city was up on a hill, but by the time the city was moved down to the valley, and the Bourbon kings bought an entire area because they wanted to move the capital of Naples inland, because they feared that the English, especially the British, could, invade. Or they were always on, the Capri, the island was their headquarters. So they feared that those guys could attack the Gulf. And in order to defend themselves, they were thinking to move the capital inland, just 30 miles inland. But then they ended up just building their residential area, because this project was not achieved, but the building was built, and I don't know, I know you, Mark, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but I encourage you guys to come and visit the Royal Palace of Caserta, which is as big and as important as Versailles. And it's a huge palace. It's a huge park. There's an English garden as well, because at the time there was this kind of competition between the Italian philosophy or the European philosophy and the British philosophy. So the Italian one was squared, and the English one was irregular. So there were those two main ways to approach the gardens. And the kings of Naples, close to the palace, they developed their vineyards. They actually were buying grapes from their subjects, but then they ended up cultivating their own because, as I told you, they were always competing with their cousins in Paris, and they wanted to show off, and they wanted to demonstrate that, that they were doing a good job. They could not stand the fact that those guys were coming down south, with their own barrels. So they started developing their own vineyards, and they built actually 11 vineyards just close to the palace. And they planted a bunch of different varietals typical of southern Italy.
Okay, that's a really fascinating story and a really important piece of Italian history, the Kingdom of Naples, with this magnificent royal palace at Caserta, the Reggia di Caserta, that, as you say, was as big, if not bigger, than the Palace of Versailles. And Campania and the Kingdom of Naples in that era, Massimo, was a fabulous, encompassed all of southern Italy, including Abruzzo, Puglia, Calabria, Basilicata, and Sicily too, didn't it? So it was all of southern Italy under the Spanish Bourbons. And Naples, I think I've read, was a glittering city, one of the most beautiful and fabulous cities in Europe at that time, eclipsing many other capitals. So this was a really important part of Italian history. But Massimo, your family's history also links with this time. I know your family can trace its history in this area back until at least the 16th century. And you've told me that they were originally very important in an important part of the economy, the silk business. Tell us about silk and your area.
Yeah, let me just give you a short aside about the origin. So the family most likely has a Lombard origin. That's why it's called Alois, because Aloysius it was a typical Roman German name. That's why in Tirol as well you find many people whose name is Alois as a Christian name. So now throughout the years Alois became our last name, and the family used to live up on the hills, the ancient town I was telling you about, Caserta was called. That's why it's called today Caserta. Okay.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
just let me just tell you one more thing about the family. In the 16th century, one of the members of the family was executed by the Holy Inquisition because he embraced with a bunch of other intellectuals and noble families in the area, and I'm talking about Naples and Caserta, they embraced the Lutheran Reformation. So those guys, they were found reading a bunch of texts, a bunch of pamphlets which were coming from German through a missionary called Juan de Valdez. That's why the movement, was that community, that fellowship was called Valdensians. So, long story
Oh,
short, this member of the family was executed in the main square in Naples because that was the area where all the executions were held. And we're dating back to the 1564. And since then, they confiscated all their properties, and part of it was then released in the following century. But anyway, for a couple of centuries, they strived with the economy, to make their living, Anyway, the family got involved during the Bourbon reign in the silk manufacturing industry because, as I was telling you, the kings of Naples, the Bourbon kings, were connected to the French, and so they wanted to kind of imitate what they were doing, in Paris, and they set up their silk plant to make silks, for the garments of the ladies of the court. And the Alois family has always been involved in that kind of industry, taking care of vineyards as well, because as I told you, all around this mill, there were the vineyards, which were all besides the royal palace, the Reggio di Caserta that you mentioned, and this small borgo village was called and is called San Leucio. So my family moved from up the hill down to San Leucio, and we have always lived here. We still live here, and we have always looked after the manufacturing plant and always been involved in the silk industry. Just to give you an example, all those fabrics, which are long scale designs, which are not a print, they are called jacquard fabrics, which means the design is the result of the intersection between the warp and the weft, which means the vertical and the horizontal threads. So that intersection gives bird, develops the designs. And a bunch of these designs and bunch of these fabrics and tapestries you can find now in the White House, for example, or at the Vatican, and in a bunch of main palaces and buildings all around the world, just because there were just a few looms which could reproduce big scale designs. And my family has always been involved in the silk industry.
Well, that's amazing. That's an amazing story, Massimo. And that sophistication of the technology of those days to be able to make those designs using the different silks. Was the whole area around Caserta planted with the mulberry trees from which the silk would be derived, as well as vineyards? And are there still large plantations of mulberry trees?
Yeah, let me just tell you. So 30 years ago, we decided to split with part of the family, and there are two of my cousins, main cousins, who are still in the silk industry. And this is how we revived all the ancient vines of the kings of Naples, because we decided to take over all the vineyards. And so more than 30 years ago, actually, was in 1992, we decided to focus on the wine industry. Just going back to what you were asking me, so yeah, this is a tradition that a bunch of producers are still continuing. And the reason why we actually became pretty well known in the States is due to the interest that William Hearst showed towards our fabrics, because he was refurbishing, he was renewing his big house in San Simeon.
Oh, yes.
What would you call it? San Simeon
Yes, yes.
in
I know
California.
in California, this
Yeah,
which is now the museum.
it's a museum, exactly.
Yeah.
So when he became a member of the house, he got in touch with a guy who was a producer here in San Leucio in Caserta, but who had to escape because he was amazing. And Mussolini, we still keep the letter, where Mussolini told him just to leave Italy. But this guy was a very well-known producer, and he ended up reproducing a bunch of fabrics that William Hearst showed him, because he knew that he was working for a pretty important mill in New Jersey. So he visited him. This guy did a good job and introduced him to the White House. So since the 1948 with Truman, most of the fabrics which I've refurbished, the White House came from this small village called San Leucio, just because, they and we had and have those special looms which can weave big designs, which can easily,
Wow.
be part of a house as curtains or, as tapestries on the walls.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Amazing story. So this Via della Seta, this Silk Road, is linked closely to the Via del Vino, and the Via del Vino, of course, leads directly to Cantine Alois. Was it your father, Massimo, that decided to leave or to combine the world of silk, but also develop the wine side of the family business?
Yes, he did. It was my father who had this dream to revive all those ancient vines, all those indigenous varietals that his father was cultivating in one of the hills close to San Leucio, which is called the San Silvestro, which is now a WWF resort. So this hill was home of two of the 11 vineyards of the kings of Naples. And we have always, even after Italy was united and after, the kings of Naples had to escape because of the Italian unification, we were still there taking care of the crops. And so my father has always heard his father saying that there were a bunch of different varietals which were almost extinct. And he decided in 1992 to buy a piece of land and set up an experimental vineyard in order to identify the right clones of those varietals which were supposed to be indigenous. And then he planted 9 different varietals, and he ended up discovering that 3 out of 9 were really indigenous. And we're talking about Pallagrello Bianco, Pallagrello Nero, and Casavecchia. So this is the period where he decided to take over all the vineyards from the family. So he left the silk industry and he started focusing on the wine industry, trying to replanting those varietals which were originally grafted on a wild rootstock, trying to develop them on the American rootstock because, as you surely know, was pretty tough at the time and today as well to develop a decent vineyard, on a wild rootstock. So the Piedefranco rootstock. So what he did, he transformed a bunch of the crops that we had into vineyards. And so at the end of the 90s, he started developing vineyards, planting those indigenous varietals, which were part of his experimental vineyard.
Okay, that's a really fascinating story. And again, also linked to history, as you say, because the Bourbon kings had, I know one of those 11 vineyards you've mentioned was the Vigna del Ventaglio, this
Exactly.
beautiful vineyard near San Lucio. Is it in San Lucio where some of these native grape varieties you've mentioned were cultivated? Now, I think what's particularly interesting, Massimo, about what you've just told us, but also about the story of wine in Campania as a whole region, is how grape varieties, native grape varieties, remain very local. Pallagrello Bianco, Pallagrello Nero, Casavecchia. These are varieties you only find in your area. Is that right? I haven't come across them in any other part of Campania, let alone anywhere else in Italy. They're quite local to you.
Yeah, I would say for two main reasons. Number one, after the French Revolution, the kings of Naples cut off any ties with the rest of the world because they feared, especially the queen, who was the sister of Marie Antoinette, who was executed.
In 1793.
Yeah, exactly. In 1793, exactly. So they feared that those new ideas about the conception of republic could invade the southern Italy as well. And this is the reason why cutting off any ties with the rest of the world was a kind of hindrance in order to develop what they were doing down south. And this is one of the main reasons why all our indigenous varietals just remained in the south versus the French varietals which invaded the entire world. And second, I would say they've just been revived. So it's a pretty recent revival that occurred in southern Italy, and it's actually something which was subsidized by the ministry as well, because they realized that they were making a mistake in acknowledging DOP, appellations recognition to those areas whose varietals were not indigenous. In the 90s, they changed their policy and they started supporting those areas whose producers were interested in reviving all these indigenous varietals, and that's what we did.
Okay, that's a really important point for our listeners to understand that, and what makes the wines of Campania so exciting, I think, is that, you can come to Campania, or I know you export your wines all over too, and really taste wines made from grape varieties that come from nowhere else, that really have flavors and textures that are totally unique.
I would say it's pretty difficult to compare these varietals with the varietals that we know, which have been planted all around the world, especially with the French varietals. We don't find any comparisons. So the Pallagrello Bianco, for example, it's always pretty citrus forward. Most of the times the aromas brings you to the grapefruit. The Casavecchia, for example, is very supple. The tannins are always silky, but it's a pretty tannic wines, and Pallagrello Nero as well. They are both tannic forward. The Pallagrello Nero, it's spicy versus the Casavecchia, which is always silky. But they're both, I would say, wines which helps your palate to be cleansed after you eat something, fat. So they encourage you to drink more and eat more because they play this role, I would say, in order to cleanse the palate because of those pretty tannic profile. Yeah.
Okay. I tasted wines with you at Vinitaly, and I was really, really impressed with what you're doing. I just want to single out the three Alois cru wines, the Marrone for the Pallagrello Bianco, the Trebulanum from Casavecchia, which I absolutely loved, and the Murella for the Pallagrello Nero. Can you just say a few words about each of these three wines, and then we'll move on to talk about the gastronomy?
Okay, so let me tell you, we were really astonished a few years ago when we finally discovered that up on a hill where we planted the Pallagrello Bianco and Pallagrello Nero, we could bring grapes into the cellar with pH which was below 3.1. I mean, just to give an idea to our listeners, a wine with a pH under 3.1 is a wine which is already healthy. You bring grapes into the cellar, which is ready to be vinified without any human intervention. So that for us was a good achievement because we wanted to produce a white from the south which could last for a pretty decent period of time. So just to give you an idea, now we still open bottles which are 14, 15 years old and they are still green. So they are not oxidated at all. They haven't lost their pale yellow color. So they're still there, and they are in pretty good shape. And Trebulanum, instead, is a piece of crop that has been developed on one of the best rootstocks that we have experimented. Because just to let you know, when we first started, in the 90s, we didn't know which rootstock was suitable for those kind of brand new varietals. So what we did, we just chose a bunch of different rootstocks and just randomly we started planting them, trying to discover which one was doing its best job, was doing a good job. And then we ended up discovering that this rootstock, which is 1103 Paulsen anyway, was giving us the best results. So we have identified that piece of land and we decided to make our Reserva wine out of it. And same thing we did up on the hill at 1,200 feet on the sea level in a calcareous kind of soil with the Murella, which is 100% Pallagrello Nero, harvested at the beginning of October and aged for a couple of years, like the Trebulanum as well, in large format casks. We don't use barrels, we just use large format casks, mainly Italian wood from up north.
Okay, I remember particularly loving the Trebulanum when I tasted that with you. I think I tasted it the previous year with you at Vinitaly as well. And what I recall was it was, yes, a big red wine, powerful. The tannins were there. but it was opulent and it had that silkiness that I think you've mentioned. The tannins were very smooth and well knit, and perhaps that's another link of the Via della Setta and the Via del Vino. Massimo, let's talk about the gastronomy of Caserta. Your wines, as you say, these are gastronomic wines, are wines to enjoy with food. Tell us a little bit about the foods of your areas and what everyone listening to this podcast, when they visit the province of Caserta, when they visit Alta Campania, what should they be eating, and which of your wines pair with a few of the piatti tipici?
So, as you said, our wines are gastronomic wines, and Campania cuisine is very well recognized for its freshness. So, most of our dishes are fresh. For example, crudi, when it comes to fish, or just a little bit steamed, or the spaghetti with fresh tomatoes, cherry tomatoes. Or sometimes San Marzano, just with a little basil. So, or for example, mozzarella. So, if I just would have to mention the mozzarella, which is, as you surely know, comes from Caserta. So we just have two main DOP in our region. One is down south in Salerno area, where they produce the 20% of the entire production, and up north, where we are in Caserta, we produce the other 80%. So the mozzarella is made out of water buffalo milk. You cannot use any cow milk. And I would surely pair a Pallagrello Bianco. Might be an old Morrone or an old Cayeti. And I think they would pair pretty well because those wines have got a pretty high acidic, which could easily cleanse your palate after, you bite the mozzarella. And usually you bite the mozzarella taking the ball with your hand and trying to make the milk licking all around your lips. That's
Okay.
what we typically do once we
Yeah.
we visit one of those dairies.
And Massimo, this is mozzarella like we never taste outside of your area. We're talking about mozzarella that's incredibly fresh, maybe made the same day. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you won't find any Casertano or Napolitano who's going to eat the mozzarella the day after. It needs to be fresh. It needs to be chewy. It needs to be crunchy. You need to hear the sound once you bite it. So we are obsessed about all the different dairies.
Okay.
It's like
We,
drinking, Barolo coming from the different areas, from Serraluna,
okay.
Monforte, with its different inns of tannins. So same
Yeah,
applies to
yeah,
mozzarella here.
yeah. What about the difference between the mozzarella di Caserta, the Caserta DOP, and the mozzarella from near Paestum in the province of Salerno? Are they different?
I would say yes. They're different because ours is saltier than theirs. And everything has to do with the brine, when
The salt, because the curds are in a hot brine.
exactly. I think
Yeah.
it's on one side the way you add the rennet to
Mm-hmm.
the curd, and the other thing is the salty water that you use. So we use more salty water. So theirs is more tender. Ours is chewier. Is I would say slightly harder than theirs. I don't want to say that theirs is more delicate, but for sure ours is more dense, is
Okay.
chewier, is saltier for sure. So yeah, there's a huge difference between those
Okay,
two.
fascinating. And as you say, we think of the food of Campania is fresh and vibrant and a wonderful seafood from the Bay of Naples. What about with these beautiful big red wines? Because inland Campania is another world from the sea, isn't it? What would
Yeah,
you say some of the
exactly.
best pairings would be for Trebulanum and
Yeah.
Morella?
For sure, I would say the Laticauda lamb, Agnello Laticauda. So this is a special breed that we have here in Caserta, and there are a bunch of places who are doing a pretty fantastic and tremendous job when it comes to slaughtering those lambs. I don't want to call them suckling lambs, but the meat is so tender that, we tend to grill them in order to give a little acidic, to the lamb. And they pair pretty well with our Trebulanum for sure, because it's something which comes from the area. And it's as though, the wine and that breed, they found a way to look at each other and try to be a good compromise, between the wine and food. So for sure, I
What
would
is
say,
the name of that breed again?
yeah, Laticauda, Agnello,
Laticauda.
which stands for
Yep, yep,
lamb, Agnello
yep.
Laticauda.
Laticauda. And what about with the Pallagrello Nero?
Yeah, so with Pallagrello Nero, I would recommend a good Genovese. So I think
Ah,
Genovese is one of those dishes that everybody think comes from Genova, but it has nothing to do with the Genova region, which is up north, underneath Piemonte. Genovese, it looks like, was a captain who was on one of the vessels of the kings of Naples, who was asked by the queen to cook a special dish made out with onions. And that's what he did. So he took a big piece of cow meat and he started cooking those onions for 5-6 hours in order just to make them melt and trying to balance their sweetness with the meat. Anyway, the Genovese is our main pasta dish, and I think that Pallagrello Nero would be a good pairing.
okay, that's wonderful. And actually, Genovese, when I'm in Naples, is one of my favorite things to eat. It really is so wonderful, this slow cook to the sweetness of the onions and the meat,
Yeah.
usually over pasta. Is that right, Massimo?
Yeah, exactly. Usually, what we use the candele. Candele is a special shape, which is kind of I don't know how to say. May you help me? A kind of piping, a
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah.
yeah. And we
A
just cut
tube.
them
Yeah,
off. Yeah, we cut them off with our hands. This is the reason why, on the pan where we cook for, as you said, for 5-6 hours, the onions, and then we put the pasta inside. At the very end, you find all those, I would say, small cuts of pasta, that
yeah.
you take them with your spoon and with the onions. I can promise you, it's a delicious dish.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. Massimo, let's just finally talk about hospitality at Cantine Alois. Can our listeners visit you?
Yeah, yes, of course, they can. Of course, sending us an email at info@vinialois.it. So we are mentioned is located in Pontelatone, and our foresteria, is located in Pontelatone and a winery as well. And all around we have 10 hectares, 30 acres, and people can easily reach us and they can reach us out. So we are more than welcome to give, hospitality to the wine lovers and, our friends and our clients coming from all over the world.
Okay, that's fabulous. I think it's been a really good introduction to this special subseries, Massimo, because you've not only taken us to Campania, but you've also taken us to a particular corner, your corner of Alta Campania. And I think that's what's going to be very interesting as we have some further conversations around this beautiful region to see how wines, foods, life is very unique in each area. So thank you very much for being our guest today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And most of all, I look forward to meeting up with you again, to visiting you in Pontelatone.
Please do it. We're waiting for you, okay, during the harvest, and we'll put you at work, okay?
Okay, I'd love that. That would be wonderful.
Mark, thanks
Massimo,
again.
grazie mille.
And grazie a te, grazie molto.
Ok, a presto.
Grazie, a presto, grazie. Ciao, Mark. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao. We hope today's episode of Wine, Food and Travel with me, Marc Millon, on the Italian Wine Podcast has transported you to somewhere special. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your pods. Likewise, you can visit us at italianwinepodcast.com. Until next time, chin chin.